Zhu Xi and the Foundations of Neo-Confucianism. Zhu Xi, 1130–1200, stands as the towering intellectual giant of Neo-Confucianism, a philosophical movement that sought to revitalize and re-systematize Confucian thought in response to the rise of Buddhism and Taoism. While earlier Neo-Confucian thinkers had laid the groundwork, it was Zhu Xi who synthesized their diverse ideas into a comprehensive, coherent, and systematic philosophy that would become the orthodox state ideology of China for over 700 years. He was not just a scholar, but also a dedicated teacher, an official, and a social reformer. And his life's work was a testament to his belief that philosophy should inform every aspect of human existence. Zhu Xi's genius lay in his ability to integrate metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology into a single, unified system. He took the foundational concepts of his predecessors, such as the ideas of principle and material force, and developed them with a level of detail and logical rigor that had been previously unseen. He also established a new curriculum for Confucian education by elevating 4 specific texts to canonical status. His philosophy provided a robust intellectual framework that addressed the profound metaphysical and spiritual questions posed by Buddhism and Taoism, all while reasserting the primacy of Confucian social and ethical values. The legacy of Zhu Xi is not just in the ideas he put forth, but in the very establishment of Neo-Confucianism as the dominant intellectual force in East Asia, profoundly shaping the educational, social, and political life of China, Korea, and Japan. Principle and material force. Zhu Xi's metaphysics. The central pillar of Zhu Xi's metaphysics is his dualistic yet complementary theory of principle, li, and material force. This distinction was his primary tool for explaining the nature of reality, the cosmos, and human beings. Principle, li. Zhu Xi conceived of li as the ultimate, universal, and non-material principle that gives form, order, and structure to all things. It is the perfect, eternal, and unchanging pattern that exists prior to all things. For example, the li of a chair is the perfect concept of chair that makes it a chair and not a table. The sum total of all principles is the great ultimate, Taiji. Material force. Qi is the vital energy, matter, or substance from which all things are made. It is the stuff of reality, dynamic, tangible, and subject to change. For a chair to exist, it needs to be made of qi, in the form of wood or metal. It is the combination of li and qi that brings any particular thing into existence. Zhu Xi argued that li and qi are inseparable. There is no li without qi, and no qi without li. They are distinct in their nature, but coexist in perfect harmony. In his famous phrase, principle and material force are like a rider and his horse. The horse, qi, gives the rider, li, a means of movement, but the rider gives the horse direction. The quality and clarity of the qi determine the perfection of a thing. For example, a person with pure qi will be a virtuous person, while one with turbid qi will be less so. This profound metaphysical framework provided a rational and systematic explanation for the cosmos, addressing the very questions that had led many to embrace Buddhism and Taoism. The Four Books, according to Zhu Xi. Zhu Xi's most enduring and institutional legacy was his role in creating a new Confucian canon. He selected and compiled 4 texts that he considered the most essential for a Confucian education, and provided comprehensive, authoritative commentaries on them. These texts, known as the Four Books, became the central curriculum for the Chinese civil service examinations, and the foundation of Confucian education for centuries. The Four Books are the Great Learning, Daksha. Zhu Xi saw this as the gateway to a Confucian education. It outlines a systematic path to self-cultivation, beginning with the investigation of things and culminating in a harmonious society. The Doctrine of the Mean, Zongyong. This text, which was a chapter of the Book of Rites, was elevated by Zhu Xi to a major work. It discusses the relationship between human nature and the cosmos, emphasizing the importance of following the way of the mean to achieve harmony. The Analects of Confucius, Lunyu, a collection of sayings and conversations of Confucius, which Zhu Xi saw as the foundational source for his ethical and moral teachings. The Mencius, Mengzi, the philosophical work of Mencius, which Zhu Xi saw as a necessary supplement to the Analects, particularly for its detailed arguments about the innate goodness of human nature. Zhu Xi argued that these 4 books, when studied in this specific order, provided a complete and progressive guide to Confucian thought, moving from the practical steps of self-cultivation to the profound metaphysical and ethical teachings. His detailed commentaries provided a definitive interpretation of these texts, and their adoption as the official standard for the civil service exams cemented his intellectual dominance and ensured his philosophy would shape the minds of the Chinese elite for generations. Learning to be human. Zhu Xi's moral philosophy. For Zhu Xi, the purpose of education was not just to acquire knowledge, but to achieve moral perfection and to learn to be human. At the heart of his moral philosophy was the belief that human nature is inherently good, because every human being is endowed with the complete principle, Li, of the great ultimate, Taiji. The goal of a person's life, therefore, is to uncover this innate goodness, which has been obscured by the impurities of material force, qi. He prescribed a 2-pronged approach to achieving this moral perfection. Investigating things, gewu. This involved the careful, rational, and systematic study of the world, of history, and of the Confucian classics. Zhu Xi believed that by investigating things, one could grasp the principle, li, that inheres in them. This would lead to a gradual and cumulative enlightenment. Self-cultivation and inner reflection. This involved introspection, discipline, and quiet sitting, jingzhou, a form of meditation. Zhu Xi believed that one must not only investigate the external world, but also reflect inward to purify the mind, quiet the passions, and uncover the principle that resides within the heart-mind. Zhu Xi argued that these two processes were inseparable and must be pursued in parallel. The ultimate goal was to achieve a state of complete enlightenment, where the external knowledge of the world and the internal knowledge of one's own nature become one. This state, for Zhu Xi, was the ultimate fulfillment of a person's potential and the path to becoming a sage, a moral and intellectual leader who could bring harmony to society. Zhu Xi versus Buddhism and Taoism. Zhu Xi's philosophy was developed in direct and critical engagement with the rival traditions of Buddhism and Taoism. He saw these traditions as having an intellectual and spiritual pull that was attracting many of China's best minds, and he felt that Confucianism needed a robust, systematic response. His strategy was not to simply reject these traditions outright, but to understand their strengths and to incorporate some of their concepts, all while critiquing their perceived flaws. Borrowing. Zhu Xi borrowed heavily from Buddhist and Taoist metaphysics, particularly in his development of the concepts of principle, li, and the great ultimate. His concept of li as an ultimate, non-material source of reality, and his practice of quiet sitting, jingzhou, show clear influences from Buddhist metaphysics and meditation. Buddhism and Taoism, critique. However, he was a fierce critic of what he saw as the fundamental shortcomings of these traditions. He attacked Buddhism for its perceived quietism, its emphasis on asceticism, and its rejection of the material world. For Zhu Xi, the goal of life was not to escape from this world, but to engage with it, to bring harmony to society, and to fulfill one's social and familiar duties. He also criticized Buddhism and Taoism for their emptiness, arguing that they failed to provide a solid moral foundation for human life. In contrast, his philosophy provided a path to spiritual fulfillment that was deeply grounded in the ethical and social responsibilities of Confucianism. By developing a Confucian metaphysics that was just as profound as that of his rivals, and by simultaneously reasserting the primacy of Confucian ethics, Zhu Xi succeeded in creating a philosophical system that could compete with and ultimately displace Buddhism and Taoism as the dominant intellectual force in China. The Great Ultimate. Zhu Xi's vision of the cosmos. The concept of the Great Ultimate, Taiji, is the capstone of Zhu Xi's cosmological and metaphysical system. It is the ultimate, non-material source of all reality, and it represents the sum total of all principles, Li. Zhu Xi described Taiji as the single underlying principle of the cosmos that gives order and harmony to the universe. Zhu Xi's vision of the cosmos can be understood through his famous phrase, "The great ultimate is simply the principle of ultimate goodness and perfect order. It is present in its entirety in every individual thing." This means that the entire universe, with all its order and perfection, is not a separate entity from the individual parts that make it up. Rather, the complete pattern of the universe is present in every single thing, from a blade of grass to a human being. The difference is only in the quality of the material force, qi, that embodies the principle. A sage, for example, is a person whose qi is so clear and pure that the great ultimate is perfectly and fully manifested in them. This concept provided a powerful and elegant philosophical solution to the question of how a single ultimate reality could give rise to the diversity of the world, and it became a foundational tenet of Neo-Confucianism. Self-cultivation and inner reflection. For Zhu Xi, philosophy was not just an intellectual exercise. It was a way of life, and self-cultivation was the practical path to a virtuous and fulfilling existence. He believed that the innate goodness of a human being was often clouded by the desires and passions that arise from the impurities of material force, qi. Therefore, the process of self-cultivation was one of purification and inner reflection, a way to uncover the innate principle, Li, that resides within every person. Zhu Xi advocated for a number of methods of self-cultivation. One of the most important was quiet sitting, jingzuo, a practice that bears a striking resemblance to Buddhist meditation. He emphasized the importance of sitting quietly and clearing the mind of distracting thoughts and emotions. He saw this as a way to calm the passions and allow the innate goodness of human nature to shine through. Another key practice was honoring the moral nature, Zun De Xing, which involved a rigorous and constant self-examination to identify and correct one's moral flaws. He believed that by combining these practices of inner reflection with the external study of the classics, a person could achieve a state of complete moral and intellectual perfection. His emphasis on self-cultivation provided a spiritual and ethical dimension to Neo-Confucianism that was both deeply personal and universally accessible. Zhu Xi's role in Chinese civil service education. Zhu Xi's legacy is perhaps most visible in the institutional history of China through his transformative role in Chinese civil service education. For centuries, the civil service examination system was the primary path to social and political power in China. Zhu Xi's commentaries on the four books were adopted as the official curriculum and the standard for these exams during the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties. This single decision cemented his intellectual dominance and ensured that his philosophical system would be taught and memorized by generations of Chinese scholars. By making his interpretation the orthodox standard, the state essentially codified Zhu Xi's Neo-Confucianism as the official ideology. To pass the exams and become a government official, a scholar had to master Zhu Xi's philosophy. This meant that his ideas about the cosmos, ethics, and human nature were not just academic concepts, but were the very principles that guided the governance of the Chinese state. This influence was unparalleled in Chinese history. Zhu Xi's curriculum and his philosophical system became the intellectual backbone of the state, shaping the minds of the elite and providing a coherent philosophical foundation for the political and social order. Harmony between reason and ritual. Zhu Xi's philosophy was a remarkable synthesis that sought to create a harmony between reason and ritual. He saw these two concepts as inseparable parts of a single, comprehensive Confucian way of life. The rational and metaphysical aspect of his philosophy was centered on the concept of principle, li, which he believed could be understood through reason and the investigation of things. However, he argued that this understanding of principle must find its expression in the world through concrete, social, and ceremonial acts, which are governed by ritual, li. It is important to note the distinction, li as principle and li as ritual. For Zhu Xi, the principle of humanity and social order could be understood by the mind, but it was manifested in the world through the performance of the proper rituals. Rituals were not just empty, formalistic acts. They were the concrete, physical embodiment of the cosmic and moral principle. He emphasized the importance of rituals for everything from state ceremonies to family rites, arguing that they were essential for creating a harmonious and well-ordered society. This balance between the intellectual and the practical, between reason and ritual, was a key feature of his philosophy, and a major factor in its long-term success. It provided a spiritual and intellectual depth to the Confucian tradition that was deeply rooted in the practical, social responsibilities of human life. Zhu Xi's influence on East Asian thought. The influence of Zhu Xi's Neo-Confucianism was not limited to China. It was a powerful and transformative force that shaped the intellectual, political, and social history of East Asia. His philosophy became a central pillar of thought in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, where it was adopted by scholars and rulers as a guide to governance and personal conduct. Korea. Zhu Xi's Neo-Confucianism became the official state ideology of the Joseon dynasty, 1392–1897, where it was known as Juseonhak. It profoundly influenced Korean society, from its civil service examinations to its family rituals. Korean scholars such as Yi Twegye and Yi Yulgok would go on to develop Zhu Xi's ideas with their own unique interpretations, creating a vibrant and enduring tradition. Japan. Zhu Xi's philosophy was introduced to Japan during the Kamakura period, but it rose to prominence during the Edo period, 1603–1868. Where it was promoted by the Tokugawa shogunate as the official orthodoxy. Known as Shushigaku, it provided the intellectual foundation for the samurai class and influenced Japanese political philosophy, ethics, and education for centuries. Vietnam. Neo-Confucianism, with its roots in Zhu Xi's thought, was adopted as the official state ideology during the later Lei and Nguyen dynasties. It influenced the Vietnamese civil service examinations and legal system. The broad and lasting impact of Zhu Xi's philosophy across East Asia is a testament to its comprehensiveness, its intellectual rigor, and its ability to provide a powerful framework for understanding and ordering human life. His ideas became the intellectual backbone of these societies, shaping their understanding of the cosmos, human nature, and the path to a harmonious life.